the session will be recorded so that if you want to come back or if you have to leave early, we'll put it up on our YouTube channel. You can go ahead and find it there. Um, but welcome and thank you for joining. Um, Today is our Employers Hiring Now Spotlight with Mr. Theron Thomas. He is a recruiter for the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane Division. Um, he has over 30 years Army experience, and Theron has numerous qualifications and abilities. He's led soldiers in combat and peacetime, earning stellar reviews on annual ratings. He's recognized Malcolm Baldridge Project Writer. Theron's talents in personnel, logistics, operations, recruiting, and leadership are expert level. After finishing his Army career, he has gone to work for the Navy as a civilian and contributes to new employee success. He's here today to talk about government applications and applying for government positions. So we ask that you would mute your mics, and if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. We'll get you all taken care of. And if you have, like I said, we're recording this, so if you have to leave, please feel free to check the YouTube channel. We'll have this up later. And with that, Mr. Thomas, take it away.
All right, Tim, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me here today. I got introduced to Franklin several months ago through one of our employees, Sherelle Hines, who graduated from Franklin, and fantastic employee. And I've learned a little more about Franklin since then, and really appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys. That was a great introduction. Thank you so much for telling them about me. I guess what's really important here is to tell you a little bit about where I recruit for, because that's what everyone's really interested in, is how do you get a job and what do you do? And of course, this is just a sort of a small view of how the federal government works, because there are a ton of agencies out there that you could apply for. So I'm going to focus kind of on the Department of Defense and primarily my agency, which is the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane Division. That name sometimes gets us in a little bit of confusion, because we get a lot of resumes from people who operate cranes, and we we really don't have anything to do with cranes. It happens that our base is named after a Commodore crane who has a loose tied Ichabod crane from the Headless Horseman. In fact, the author of that was a friend of his brother's, so, and his brother's name was Ichabod. So that's where Crane comes from. Now, Crane is the third largest Navy base in the world. We have a footprint about the size of Washington, D.C. Massive landmass there. You know, it's just a gigantic place. Now, that's a little bit of a misnomer, because the actual area that we work in is kind of centrally located on that landmass. A lot of bunkers and test areas and things out around, but where I work is called the downtown area, and it's sort of a research laboratory is the best way to put it. Another thing about Crane is that almost everything we do is classified, so it's a true challenge as a recruiter to talk to people about coming to Crane, because we often get questions like, well, what would I be doing? And we can give you loose answers, you know, and kind of tell you about some projects that are unclassified now and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, some of the work we do, we just simply, you know, can't divulge. And it's a little bit different on the business side, because of course Crane has an employee base of about 3,900 current federal employees, and we're trying to grow to around 5,000 in the next 10 years. There's a goal to grow Crane larger than it is. Around 70 to 75% of our workforce at any given time are scientists and engineers. And we'll get into that. I'm going to give a slide presentation in a minute. But the other remaining 30% or so are business professionals. Now, if any of you are familiar with the military, you'll know that in most military bases, it's not just one thing. For example, if you go to any military installation, there may be military units there. There could be support units. There could be civilian agencies, all that thing. And Crane's not much different. Our biggest difference is, being the third largest Navy base in the world, we probably have one of the smallest populations of active duty personnel in the world also. We only have around 30 to 50 uniformed personnel working there at any given time. The rest of us work civil service. Civil service meaning government employee, government civilian employee. So another thing that's a challenge with Crane is a lot of our advertisements, because of what we do, show a lot of active duty soldiers, Navy SEALs and Marines doing the things that we provide them. So it's a bit of a challenge, because some people think, oh, well, I don't want to join the Navy. You know, and I spent 30 years in the Army, and I would invite anybody to try out the military, because it sure treated me good. But at the end of the day, what I'm talking about is civil service, a civilian job working for the government. It just happens that you're working under the Department of Defense. So let me tell you a little bit about Crane. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and give you a slide presentation. I don't really like slide presentations, but I want to do this because it's probably the best way to do it. Of course, I talked about us being Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane Division. We work under an area called NAVC, which is a Department of Navy agency. And under NAVC, there are multiple warfare centers. There's air warfare centers and underwater warfare centers, and of course, surface warfare centers that we are. So when you think about our work, even though I may tell you a little bit about some aircraft and things as we go along, the vast majority of our work is land-based things, if that helps out at all. So the area that we're located in is about 20 miles south of southwest of Bloomington, Indiana. We're the ones right here in Indiana. There are other surface warfare centers and naval research labs and things around. You'll see those around the country. And of course, their hiring practices may be slightly different than ours, but not much. And I'll share a link after a while and also send it in to you guys so you can publish it if you'd like, where you can send your resume and transcripts and things to us and actually become visible to these other agencies at the same time. Now, in a little bit, we're also going to talk about USA Jobs. And I'm sure that some of you who are watching this presentation thought you were going to hear a lot about USA Jobs, and you're really not. And I'll get along to that in a little while. So here's some quick facts. We have about $1.4 billion of business base that comes in and out of Crane, thus the business side that I talked about earlier. Now, I know you're already thinking, well, wait a minute, isn't it a government agency? You're not really a business. We are not a business, but we are a working capital fund. So we operate off of the money that is given to other agencies. For example, if they gave the Navy $1 million or $1 billion or whatever to create something, that would maybe come to Crane to develop that and maybe support it over the next 20 years or whatever, right? So that's what we mean by that. About 3,900 employees now. This slide shows a little bit old, but not real old. But we're up to about 3,900, about 67%. Like I said earlier, we're around 70 to 75% now. 102 doctorate degrees. I believe we're up to 155 now. The masters, we're now up to 700. You can see this implies the aggressive hiring that we're doing right now. And we do our work in 3 specific areas. Really kind of cool stuff. And I'll give you a couple of examples as we go through this, but strategic missions, expeditionary warfare, and electronic warfare. And you'll hear spectrum warfare also as I go along. That is electronic warfare. It kind of goes by 2 names. So let me go ahead and take a look here. This is the mission areas. This is our mission statement. This is really boring to most people. This slideshow is partly used to talk to some admirals and things like that too. But suffice it to say that we do technical work and support and engineering under sensors, electronics, electronic warfare, special warfare weapons, that type of thing, to essentially give our warfighters the advantage that they need to overcome our adversaries and to secure the defense of the nation. Strategic missions. You can read a lot of this, but I'm going to break it down. Most of what they do is in a couple of different areas. One of them is primarily the sub-launch Trident missile. It's a giant missile that's fired from submarines, and they do a ton of work on that thing, specifically the guidance systems and things. And an interesting tidbit about that is that is a nuclear missile, and if it's ever used in a nuclear environment, of course, it has to be able to survive that environment. So we're talking about a lot of radiation shielding. The Hubble telescope, when it was launched years ago, kept failing, partially because of radiation. And they actually came to Crane and asked us for some of our technology, and that is what fixed the Hubble telescope and made it where it's at today. So pretty interesting little tidbit. They also do some work on submarine batteries and some other things here. And again, I told you it was a surface warfare center, so most of the stuff we do deals with submarines when they're on the surface, other than the power. Expeditionary warfare. This is one a lot of people find really cool. Most of what expeditionary warfare does is for the special operations unit. So if you've never been in the military, you may have seen movies like that have Navy SEALs or Army Rangers or Green Berets, that type of thing. And that's the type of work that we do. You'll see there on the slide, there's a SEAL insertion boat, all those guys carrying weapons and stuff. We touch all those weapons, all the way from pistols, all the way up to the 30 millimeter chain gun that's attached to the front of that boat. You'll see the night vision attachments on our helmets. We do night vision work at Crane. A lot of things for them. As a matter of fact, the Navy SEALs came to us a few years ago. This is an example of the type of advantage that we give. And they said that they love ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, but the Polaris vehicles they were using consumed gasoline. And those gasoline motors, it was taking way too much money to get that gasoline from the coast to where they were. I think the example, if I remember right, was over $2,000 a gallon when you included all of the travel and security and all that stuff. Our scientists and engineers went out, purchased some Polaris vehicles, stripped them down to the nuts and bolts. We contracted with Canassi Racing, who developed a new transmission for that vehicle. Our battery labs got involved, developed batteries. Well, at the end of the day, within about a year, we were able to provide our Navy SEALs and other special operators with an electric, silent running ATV. And it can be charged from solar panels. It can be charged off a diesel generator, and of course, diesel is way cheaper in the lesser developed countries. So, a great advantage. And we didn't stop there because we thought, well, if it does it on four wheels, it would probably do it on two. So they went out and bought some motorcycles, used the same technology, and now our special operators have electric, silent running motorcycles as well. So, really cool stuff going on there. Sensor arrays, there's night vision, like I said, some things like that. Pretty cool stuff. Now I know another area is our electronic warfare, and this one has a personal touch with me. As you probably might remember, when I was introduced, it said I was in the Army for a long time, 30 years, and I spent some time in Iraq. Um, One of the things that helped me in Iraq was called an anti-IED system in my vehicle. And then there was a particular day I recall where I stood on top of an improvised explosive device. It was a bomb created by our enemy, and it didn't blow up, fortunately. When I left the area after a certain distance away, it did explode, and I went back to the base and alive as I should have. And The people that met me there tested out my equipment. They said that somebody had tried to set that bomb off over 100 times while I was standing there on it. I retired 8 years later from the military, and I went to work at Crane. And then during my onboarding tour, I was able to go through electronic warfare, and they were telling me about this big jamming pod thing on the bottom of the aircraft that you see there, and all of the other cool things, and radar on ships. Every ship in the Navy has radar that comes from our base on it. But one of the things they showed me was a Duke's anti-IED system. That happened to be the exact same system that saved my life 8 years earlier in Iraq. So it's really cool to work at a place where you can go to work every day and look at people who are doing their job, and you know the other end of it. I mean, sometimes when you're working in accounting or contracting or something like that, or a lot of even our engineers may not see the impact of that. So I love to share those stories with people, and we bring other warriors in to share their benefits that they've reaped from the work that we do. But anyway, that's electronic warfare. We control the spectrum. If we want the enemy to be able to talk electronically, we will let them, and we'll listen in. If we don't let them. It's what we do. We control the electronic spectrum. So that's that. This email address here is still good. We kind of stopped using the email address because we've got a resume collection system. But if you email your resume to crane_recruiting@navy.mil, that's just like, the crane, like the thing that lifts stuff up, even though we don't do that work there, _recruiting@navy.mil. We'll get your resume in the email, but you'll also get an auto reply that has another link in it. And that link is what I referred to earlier when I was saying that if you go to that site and also share your resume and your transcripts and your information, there'll be a selection that says, oh, I'm interested in Crane, Indiana, but I'm also interested in Dahlgren or, one of these other bases around the world. They'll be able to then see your resume. So it's a great way to get some visibility within NAVC for other agencies to take a look at you and see if they're interested in you. So again, that's that. It talks about the demand here. What we primarily hire: electrical engineers, computer scientists, that type of thing. But we also hire a lot of business professionals. In fact, I'm currently looking for some accounting degree holders, some folks that have business-oriented degrees, preferably that have good writing skills for our contracting department. And we'll get into those a little bit later. I'll describe those a little bit more in detail. But again, crane_recruiting@navy.mil. Send your resume, your transcripts, and hey, I heard Mr. Thomas talking on Franklin University, and I'd love to hear from you. The last thing is U.S. citizenship is required for our jobs, and that's simply because you have to have a security clearance to work on our base. Everything we do there is classified, so everybody on the base has to be eligible for a clearance. Therefore, they also have to be U.S. citizens. And there you go. If there are any questions, as I think Tim said earlier, you can put them down in the comments, and I'm more than happy to stop at any time and take any questions if someone has one. If not, you can always email us there later on, a month from now, a week from now, a year from now, and we'll try to answer your questions for you. Again, crane_recruiting@navy.mil. So I am going to stop sharing, and hopefully I did. Let's see. There we go. Stop sharing. There we go. All right. So the curiosity probably is, well, that's great, Mr. Thomas. We know where you work now. We know a lot about what you do there and that type of thing. But how in the world do I go about applying for the federal government? Okay. And I can tell you that most of the answer to that is going to be on usajobs.gov. If you're not familiar with usajobs.gov, I would highly recommend that you go to that site and you build a profile. It will help you build a resume, a federal resume. And the difference there is just the length. It's federal resumes are typically much more verbose. The reason for that is because they take your resume and they'll also kind of make your initial pay setting off your resume. So if you don't explain what you do very well, maybe you'll make a little less money starting out, even if you had the skills, because you didn't tell them. So it helps you build that type of resume. The other thing it does, and it does this really well, is you can go in and say, well, I'm very interested in a administrative position in HR and a contracting specialist position, but I'm also enjoy safety or whatever, whatever those jobs are that you're interested in. You can go search for those, and then you can also search by location. So like Crane, Indiana, or San Antonio, or wherever you want to do, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, any of those places, you can search for those. But you can also set up a search that will email you every time a job comes open that matches that criteria. You can get an email every day from USA Jobs, every week, however you want to set it up. It's a great system where it will ping you and say, hey, there are 3 new jobs open in that area. Here they are. Or it'll say, hey, there's 5 jobs that meet your criteria. Here's the locations, that type of thing. So really good way to get in touch. Okay. The civil service is a very competitive thing. And those that don't know the history, essentially, you might have ever heard of the spoils system. Well, years ago, under President Garfield, I believe it was, we used to have a system called the spoils system, which meant that if you gave enough money to a politician or your buddies with them or whatever, it was spoils. You would get a job. So the person who, donated the most or were closest relationship would get the job. That ended with him because they created the civil service, and it's a competitive program. That's why we compete on USA Jobs. You send in your resume. It's compared to many others. They do searches and they make sure that you meet the criteria. So if it's electrical engineering and you don't have an electrical engineering degree, for example, you'll never get past that. There are preferences. For example, a disabled vet gains preference over other people. Those are laws. They did that years ago, and it's still in existence today. So even widows and widowers of people who were killed in action and combat get an advantage. And what I mean by an advantage is essentially for a disabled vet with a 30% or more disability, you would get 10 extra points on any score that's in there, if that makes sense. A little bit more complicated than that, but that's the deal. So at the end of the day, those people get a little bit of an advantage over you in USA Jobs. I was one of them. That's how I got my job. Not really how I got my job, because as my boss told me, I knocked it out of the park on the interview. So that was a great part of it also. But certainly I probably made it to the point where she was able to see me because I had the 10-point advantage, right? I don't know. We'll never know, because you don't know once you do that. You just submit your resume. The other nice thing about USA Jobs is once you build that resume in USA Jobs, it's really the click of a button to apply for a job. So, you go in and update your resume once in a while. A job comes open, you click a button, answer a few questions. A few jobs may have you do a self-evaluation. Where you'll say, I'm an expert typer, but I'm not so good at filing, or whatever it might be. And that's how USA Jobs works. Now, why doesn't Crane use USA Jobs very much? Well, I'll tell you, here's the reason. It's because we have what is called direct hire authority. Okay. Now, before I go into that, I want to tell you that some people have direct hire authority too. For example, if you're a person with disabilities, you could get what's called a Schedule A letter from your doctor. If your doctor agrees that you have a physical, intellectual, or psychiatric disability that meets the standards of Schedule A, and that's a shortened version of a long code of federal regulations. There are examples of those up online. You can type in Google OPM letter, Schedule A letter, and it'll show you an example. You can go to your doctor, get that letter, and then when you apply on USA Jobs, you can say, yes, I am a Schedule A eligible person. That again gives you some advantage in hiring, and it allows the government to say, you know what, I want that person there who has the disability, and they can hire you directly by that. Now at Crane, I'll go back to us, we have direct hire authority for some of our positions. Part of the reason that is because we secure the nation's defense. USA Jobs and that whole process takes a fairly long time. You put in the thing, it goes through several levels of scanning and so on and so forth, and people get frustrated with it a little bit because sometimes it takes several months for you to get recognized, to get your interview, to finally get hired, all that stuff. We can't wait several months to get an electrical engineer who's going to solve a problem to save someone's lives. So we were given direct hire authority for the vast majority of our positions. That doesn't mean, again, that we're back to the spoils system. What it means is that we can go out to colleges and universities and gather hundreds of resumes, interview them the next day or on that same day, make a decision to hire them a few days later and start the process. So it's a great thing. Unfortunately, right now, we don't have that ability on the business side for most of our jobs. We do for contracting specialists. We do for some logistics positions that support direct missions. It just depends, but we know those. We go recruit for them. At the end of the day, send your resume in. If we're interested and we have direct hire authority, that's the way we do it. If not, also keep an eye on USA Jobs, because there are some of our jobs, very small percentage, still come out on USA Jobs, and as well as other agencies on our base, those do too. So hopefully not to confuse you, we've talked about USA Jobs. That's how most people hire in the US government, and that's where you need to go and create a resume and that type of thing. Specifically for Crane and some other DoD agencies, you can go to our email us your resume and it'll send you that link, and you can go to, it's a platform called Yellow. It's the same one that Walmart and McDonald's and some other people use. You'll input your resume. It will become visible to whoever you tell it to become visible for. Okay. So that's how we hire. Um, it's still competitive. Like I said, we get 2019, we got just a little over 6,000 resumes for about 250 positions. It is very competitive. I won't fool you with that. It's highly competitive to get the jobs there, but they're excellent jobs. So I'll tell you a little bit about the jobs at Crane, and then I'm going to go into talking a little bit about resumes and that type of thing. So the federal government's a great place to work. And I'll tell you, I can't enumerate the number of times that I've talked to an individual at a job fair that comes up and says, well, Mr. Thomas, it shows here that you're only going to offer me as a student, like, let's say $55,000 a year. But this other place is offering me $100,000 in San Francisco, California, right? Well, I typically, like an old West guy, I whip out my cell phone and I go, hey, let me show you something. And I take a look at bankrate.com. And you need to write that down if you don't have it already, because bankrate.com has a cost of living calculator in it. And you can go in there and plug in two major cities. In the example of Crane, I would use Indianapolis because it's the biggest city that's listed in there near Crane. But I'll whip it out and I'll say, okay, you said how much was it? $100,000 in San Francisco, and here's Indianapolis, Indiana, and I hit a button, and it will list out every piece of cost of living information you can wish for. Live data. It'll tell you the cost of food and the cost of fuel and entertainment and heating and electricity and all that stuff for that area. Turns out that $100,000 a year job in San Francisco, California, you only need to make about 46,000 in Indianapolis, Indiana to have the same lifestyle. So do yourself a favor, even if you're not talking to me in the future, if you're talking to any employer, do yourself a favor and compare that stuff on bankrate.com and their cost of living calculator, and make sure that you're making the right decision for yourself. But back to the federal government. Our wages are competitive. Here in Indiana, we actually did an analysis the other day. We're actually above the average in Indiana for engineers and scientists. When you come in as a student, of course, you're not going to expect to make as much as you're going to be when you're graduated, or maybe when you have a few years under your belt. But the nice thing is that we don't. Everybody gets the same pay essentially at the first level, right? And then you kind of start rising based off of performance and things like that. The pay's good, but we have a lot of benefits. For example, the federal government will give you 14 days a year off paid for federal holidays. Every single federal holiday is off, paid. Additionally, you start out with 4 hours of sick leave and 4 hours of annual leave at the lowest rate. That's when you come in. Within 3 years, at the end of 3 years, it goes up to 6 hours of annual leave. Now, the 4 hours of sick leave never changes. 4 hours of sick leave every pay period for the rest of your career. But the annual leave does. It goes up. It starts out at 4 hours per pay period, then 6 hours per pay period. And I believe it's at 13 years. And don't quote me on that because it may be 15. I don't recall right off the top of my head. It goes up to 8 hours. Now, Back to our veterans for a minute. If you've been in the military and haven't retired, or even if you've retired and you've got some combat time, you can give those 214s, DD Form 214s to us when you get hired, and that will give you an advantage on the pay on the leave time. We give leave accrual for veterans, so you have 3 years of time in the service. You'll start gaining at the 6 hour rate. Um, Also, you can buy back military time, and I won't go into that, but suffice it to say, if you spent 7 or 8 years in the military, you get out, you become a federal civilian, you can pay a very small sum back and add that whole amount of time to the amount of time you get to retire. So if you spent 5 or 6 years in the Air Force, you pay back 1% of your base pay over time, as little as $25 a month. Once that's paid off, you give the paperwork to your employer, and let's say you only spend 20 years in, your retirement pay will be based on 25 years. That's the way that works. So it's a great advantage. We also have a lot of employee groups. We've got fantastic insurance and savings plan. Thrift savings plan is wonderful. We match up to 5%. We'll start you out at 3% of your pay will be going into thrift savings plan. The government will put 1% in for free. They match the other percentages dollar per dollar. And if you want a 1% raise when you come to work for the federal government, take 2% of your raise and put it into the thrift savings plan, and they'll match that 50 cents on the dollar. You're giving yourself free money by saving money. It's fantastic. Can't be beat. What I'm getting at is the federal government's got tremendous benefits. It's a great place to work. They take care of their employees. There's just a ton of great benefit for working for the federal government. Um, so I guess we'll move on to resumes and things. And how do you get in the federal government? Um, it's based off of your qualifications. That's as simple as I can say it. If a job requires a degree in accounting or 24 hours of accounting and a degree, which is the base requirements for an accountant, for example, if you don't have either one of those, you're probably not going to get looked at. Period. Right. So to build on that, then how do I build a resume? Because I'm in a class with, you know, 75 other people at Franklin University, maybe getting an accounting degree, for example. Right. What makes me different than everyone else? Well, your experience, for one, your grade percent, GPA, your GPA plays a big part. Um, Projects you've done, experience at work, if you have any, those types of things, right? You have to list those out on your resume, because at the end of the day, when I go and help out at these Resumania events, I love to take a resume and tell the person to turn around and look at their peers standing behind them. And I say, you know, you're going to college here and you're using the same textbooks, talking to the same professors, getting the same education, doing the same, you know, tests as everybody else on the same campus. So why would I hire you instead of those other 25 or 30 people standing behind you if they're getting the same degree? And that's an eye opener for a lot of people, because they go, oh man, you know, like I don't know. In a lot of cases, some do. They'll go, well, because of my experience. That's the immediate thing, right? Well, I have a great GPA. I'm getting a 4.0, and a lot of those people probably aren't there. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's a separator that differentiates you from those other people. But how do you get the attention of an employer on a resume? And this is one of the things that I talked a little bit about with the faculty the last time I spoke to you guys, but um, I call it so what area. And I tell you, I can't tell you how many resumes I see that have a ton of white space on them. And some professional resume writers will tell you, well, you know, you don't have to fill up all the space as long as you've got enough information on there. You don't want to be like too verbose. You'll end up having too much of a resume, right? And you know what, maybe they're right. But I also see a lot of stuff on a resume where I think, my goodness, you know, you could probably say something else, right? And it never fails. Let me tell you how this works. Let's say, for example, that you said on your resume, you were working at the dairy barn, right? And all you did was serve ice cream. Okay. A lot of people will throw that on their resume and they'll say, I worked at the dairy barn. I served ice cream cones and I ran the cash register, right? And that's it. So consider this. White space on a resume is not much different than you sitting in an interview and someone saying, well, tell me about your experience at the dairy barn. And you go, well, I served ice cream. And then you just stop and you sit there kind of staring at them and they stare back at you and you keep that staring going on. And finally, the employer gets tired and says, okay, well, we'll move on to the next thing, right? What if the employer had looked you in the eyes and said, well, so what? Tell me more about that. Okay. And that's what I'm talking about with so what space. Here's a favor you can do yourself. when you get done with your resume, find a friend, a colleague, anybody, and I would say preferably someone who really doesn't know you or what you've done, because it's going to be an education and a kind of a bonding experience for you, honestly, to sit down and go line by line on your resume and literally look at you and say, well, so what? Now, some of you may have heard of a root cause analysis before. This is very similar, right? If you say I served ice cream cones, right? And now think about this: somebody behind you in that line who's getting the same degree may have served ice cream cones too, right? And they say, well, so what? Tell me more. And you go, well, I served over 4,000 of them a day, you know? Well, now you're different than the person who just say served ice cream cones, are you not? And if you say, well, as a matter of fact, my boss gave me a bonus one time because I never dropped an ice cream cone one time. And they say, well, so what? Tell me more, right? And you go, well, I was eventually promoted to shift leader because I knew how to make ice cream cones better than anybody else, right? And that person needs to just write down some notes. They don't have to write you down verbose because you know these things. You're the one telling them, right? They give you that resume back and you're going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, like, why did I put down served ice cream cones when I could say, I served ice cream cones. Let me back up. I served over 4,000 ice cream cones a day while working at my employer uh, with zero defects. I never dropped a single ice cream cone. And in fact, I gained a promotion because of my expertise in serving those, right? Now, some of you are going to say, you know what? I'm trying to become an accountant. Nobody cares about me serving ice cream cones. And you're wrong. Okay. And here's why: because employers do care. That means that you paid attention. That means you're trainable. That means that you cared about your work. There's all these things that go into that, right? And at the end of the day, why leave so what space on your resume if you can fill that space with something that's maybe going to differentiate you a little bit from those 25 or 30 people behind you, right? So that's kind of the example I can give. I can't. I get resumes sometimes that don't have contact information on them. I get resumes sometimes that the email address is embarrassing to read. Do yourself a favor. Gmail's free. Go out and get yourself an email address that says theron.thomas@gmail.com. And if that's not available, then it's Theron Thomas 1966 or something, right? There are some truly, truly unusual email addresses. And I'm telling you, employers pay attention to that. Put your contact information on there. Be bold up front. If you have an objective, tell them what that objective is. A lot of people, I saw one just the other day, said, I'd like to get a job at a place where I can learn more, blah, blah, blah. It didn't say anything about what he was bringing to the employer, right? So considering your objective, what's your objective? Your objective is to get a job. Let's face it. That's it. You're looking to get a job. That isn't really what the employer wants to see. What they're looking for is, I want to get a job and bring my talents to you, and here's why that would be important to you and to me, right? So consider that when you're writing out that objective statement, and say, I want to get a job with your employer because I heard that Crane is the third largest Navy base in the world and provides advantage to the warfighters. And I couldn't serve in the military, but I would love to serve the military. And this is a way that I can do it. And I can bring my skills in accounting there to help out with the, $1.4 billion of annual money that comes through there or whatever, right? You saw that on the slide earlier. Go out and research your employer that you're looking at. That's the next topic I want to talk about, because in an interview, one of the things that's going to happen, so you got a great resume, right? And you finally got chosen and someone's going to talk to you. They said, man, this guy told me all kinds of stuff about this. This young lady had all kinds of great things on her resume. And they finally get you. Well, the first thing you need to know is you need an elevator speech. If you've never heard that term, let me tell you what it is. An elevator speech is you telling someone about yourself in a convincing manner that's going to take you somewhere between 30 and 45 seconds. Okay. All it is knowing yourself. Nobody knows you better than you. So, who are you? What have you been doing? What do you want to do in life? Maybe what kind of hobbies you got, whatever, right? Just something about yourself. Because I interview quite a bit, and sometimes I'll say, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And they're like, well, I'm looking for a job, or they'll say, well, I'm a college student at Franklin, and I was just kind of hoping to get an internship. No, that's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is, you know, uh, my name's Tim Getz, and I'm a student at Franklin University, and I've always wanted to work for the United States government. Unfortunately, I was unable to serve in the military, but I would really like to serve the military. And in fact, I think my degree in whatever it is, business management would bring an advantage to you guys. In my spare time, I like to play golf, and I've got, two dogs and a kid at home, type thing. She's 3 years old and the light of my life, right? That's what I'm talking about. That's an elevator speech. It'll get better over time because you'll get experience. You'll be able to say, well, my previous employers, I've always been recognized for outstanding performance, and in fact, over the last 3 employers I've had, I've saved them over $4 million by accurate accounting or whatever. Right? Yeah, you get these things that you got, but make sure you've got that. Secondarily, in an interview, don't be afraid to ask someone to come back to a topic. Okay, because I can tell you right now, at least from my perspective, I would much rather have someone say, can we come back to that? Because I need to think about it for a minute, right? Instead of going, well, I guess I could tell you this, right? Because you, at that point, you might just be pulling something out of thin air, right? And just telling me what it is. I would much rather have an employee who isn't going to act impulsively, who's going to think about their answers and that type of thing. So if play stump the chump, and we give you a question where you're just like, oh man, I can't even know what just say, hey, you know what? I'd like to think about that one for a minute. Can we move on to the next question and we'll come back to that? And write that down, because they're not going to do it for you. Okay. You're the one that's going to have to, 2 questions later, say, you know what? Can we go back? I want to answer that question for you. Now I've given it some thought. And the most creative answer or most creative solution I've ever come up to with a problem was when my aunt's lawnmower wouldn't work, or whatever it might be. You've actually thought about it and you come up with this great example. That research on the employer is vital, okay? Because just like me, I've given you a lot of information about the federal government. But let's just say, for example, that you're a nursing mother, and you're one. Can I nurse at the federal government? Do they abide by policy? How's that work? Whatever it might be, I don't care. But be prepared to ask some questions and write down enough that if the person talking to you covers all of them, that maybe you've got something else out there. Okay. I only tell you that because 2 things. One, at the end of the interview, you're going to get answers that you're looking for. And 2, it gives you a little bit more time with that employer. Memory serves. Okay. So when you're talking to an employer, the more time you can spend with them, the more memorable you're going to become. Hopefully that's famous and not infamous, right? you're going to be like the person they remember because you asked great questions, because you were engaged and you knew about their organization before they even told you about it. Okay. Those are really, really important things to remember about interviewing. I'm looking over here at the time to see what kind of time that I've got. It looks like we've got about 15 or so minutes left. So not all government agencies are the same. You've listened to me talk about the Naval Surface Warfare Center at Crane, Indiana. We are one of DoD agencies. Okay, the Veterans Administration, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Interior, all of those things, NASA, whoever it might be, have some different policies. The root of the federal government pretty much remains the same. And I'll give you a great example. Most government agencies are going to offer you a job based off of what's called a GS scale. Okay. And a lot of you probably heard that. Your entry level is a GS7 position, right? Within a GS level, there are multiple steps. Okay. So I'm a GS7 step 1 starting out. Next year, I'll be a step 2 if I don't totally mess up. Okay. And that's the way the vast majority of the government works. Okay. Now, those GS skills are available online. You can look them up and see what that pay is. And if someone ever says, well, this is a GS7 position, just come out and ask them, well, what kind of pay range is that? Because that's important to you, right? The reason I tell you that is here's the difference between Crane and a lot of places. We don't use the GS scale. We have a program called the demo system. And what it is, just imagine this. So those step levels are they're okay increases, don't get me wrong, but let's say that you're a young wizard electrical engineer or physicist, and you come to work at Crane, and we've been trying to solve a problem for years. I'll give you an example. The Navy came to us several years ago and said, hey, we have a problem. We need to be able to see the enemy out there, like they're tearing us up in Afghanistan. And somebody came up with a thing called the GBOSS system, which is a telescoping pod of a bunch of electronics, and it can see everything for like a 10-mile radius, right? Whoever came up with that idea was a genius, as are most of our people that work there. We've got some brilliant people working for our organization. But if that were a GS scale, we would just say, well, great job. You're now a GS 11, step 3. Super, you know. Now, there are some award programs and stuff in the government, so don't let me mislead you there. But at Crane, we use the demo scale. So it's a performance based scale. What I'm saying is like, for example, myself, I'm at the NT4 scale. Now, if people know GS, they'll think, my God, that guy's working for very little because it's a 4 level. Actually, the NT4 scale ranges between, I think it's GS10 and GS12. Okay. The next level down is between like GS8 and GS10. Why that's important is because when you work for an organization like ours, it's a performance based organization. So if you do a great job, you can get performance award, right? And what that will do is that could potentially bump you up 3 or 4 steps in 1 year. That's how we retain great talent. We don't just use the GS scale. There's a reason we have it and other places don't. We have to retain those brilliant minds that make all this wonderful stuff that secures our nation and gives our advantage to our warfighters. And that's part of the way we do it. So I tell you that because if you go and apply for us as a student intern or even as an entry level employee, you might be offered an NT2 position, for example. And sometimes people don't ask that question. Well, what's that salary range? And they'll think, what? 2 level? Come on. I just graduated with my bachelor's degree in, financial management or whatever it is. Should I be worth a little more than that? Well, make sure you talk about that. The other thing is don't be fearful of the U.S. government because there are negotiations within the government, right? So let's say that you have to move from Ohio to Indiana. You can easily say, hey, can you give me a moving allowance? I need to move my entire house from Ohio to Indiana. Negotiate that. Negotiate with your employer because at the end of the day, they're not going to take back an offer. The federal government, the way they work is they give you an offer. You can ask for something. They can come back and give it to you. They can come back halfway, or they can come back and say, I'm sorry, this is your final offer, right? But do yourself a favor and ask for those things because most of the time they won't be just given to you up front. Okay. So ask, if you think maybe you're worth a little more money, you can ask for that. If it's a moving allowance, you can ask for that. One of the things I didn't talk about earlier with Crane, and this is an enticement for you to really consider coming to us, is we've got a tremendous employee development program there. In fact, they've talked about trying to get an EDU designation. We've got a lot of PhDs and a lot of people there working, creating curriculum for our employees. Every year we send somewhere between 20 and 30 employees out for master's degrees that don't cost anything to the employee. It's a competitive thing. You have to apply for it. We do the same thing with PhDs. We take our master's folks and those types of, and we offer to potentially send them out for a PhD. Again, competitive. It's not a guarantee with your employment, but it's a great thing. Training. If you want to find a place where you're going to get more and more training and develop everything, that's why we have the workforce development program. You're not going to find many employers that are going to offer you more opportunities to learn while you're working than what we do at Crane because we value knowledge, we value education, so we offer those types of things. I'll tell you just a little bit about the area also, because we're reverting back a little bit about Crane. Crane is about 25 miles, about a 25-minute drive from Bloomington, Indiana. If you're not familiar with Bloomington, Indiana, it's where Indiana University is, the home of basketball in Indiana, at least arguably. Some people will say that's at Purdue. Some people will say where it's at Notre Dame, whatever. But the Hurrian Hoosiers, that's where Bloomington's at. That's where I live. It's a nice multicultural town, college town like many others. Not a huge city, but growing fast. We've just put in Interstate 69 from Evansville all the way up to Indianapolis. The last leg of it in Indianapolis is currently being worked. So when that's done, Indianapolis is only going to be about a 45-minute drive from Bloomington. And then, of course, Evansville, Indiana is right now about an hour and 10-minute drive from Crane. Now, Crane was pretty rural. When it was created back in the 30s, it was essentially created because there was an arsenal up in the northeast part of the United States that blew up. It had been there for decades, and the bunkers were side by side because they didn't know any better. When that blew up, we were worried about invasion from Japan and Germany and some other places, and blimps and airplanes were being invented, right? So they put Crane toward the middle of the country. It happened that it was going to be a national park, but then there was a need for this ammo depot, right? So it's a beautiful place. I mean, it's a hilly country. There's trees, and you can. I tell people that like the outdoors, if you want to go on a bicycle ride on Crane, you can pedal for 4 hours and never see another person. You'll see white-tailed deer and turkey and bald eagles and fox and all kinds of stuff. We have a 127-acre lake there. You can rent boats, you can rent cabins, all that stuff. It's all employee perks. Um, Very beautiful place. Because of its location out around the southern end of Crane, you have smaller communities, farming communities. You've got Odin, Lagodi, Bloomfield, Indiana, those types of places, to give you an idea of where it's at. Um, Going back to the thing I talked about earlier about bankrate.com, I see a lot of people go take good jobs in other places, and they live in a 4-bedroom flat with 8 other people, and they ride a bicycle to work every day, and they live on ramen noodles 4 days a week, because that's the cost of living difference. A lot of people that come to work at Crane immediately buy a house and some farmland and stuff, and it's a great place. There's a lot of great places to live out around the area. So looks like we might actually have a question coming in. Tim, do you see that? Or
Sorry, that was from earlier. It was just she was commenting on one of your stories and just said that's awesome. So,
oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you. I don't know which story it was because I tell a lot of stories, but yeah, thank you so much. And so I guess as we try to wrap up here, I'm just going to remind people a little bit about some things. Number one, keep in mind crane_recruiting at navy.mil. That's the easiest way to tell you, because if I tried to tell you the URL, and I'll send it to you guys when we're done here, that will take you to that link, but you'll get an auto reply. If you send an email to crane_recruiting at navy.mil, you'll get an auto reply, and that auto reply, there will be a link that says, oh, also, would you please go apply here? That's the place I told you where you can become more visible to people within NAVC and to us. And we'd love to see some people apply there. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend going to usajobs.gov, create yourself a profile, create your resume in there, and set yourself up so that you get those automatic emails telling you about jobs that are available in the areas that you're interested in. So the last thing is, I'm going to plug just a few positions. I've looked at your college over there, and some of the jobs that we have open: computer science majors, electrical engineers, computer engineers. Those are the top 3 that we're always looking for. Okay. If you've got a degree in that area, you're looking for one, certainly get a hold of us. We have great internship programs. The SSEP program is for our STEM student employment program. That's for scientists and engineers. That internship program essentially makes you a government employee. If you're selected for that program, you become a government employee. You're called an intern. But at the end of the day, as long as you keep up your schoolwork, you keep your GPA up, you get the degree we agreed upon, and you do good work, at the end, when you graduate, more than likely, you're just going to get converted. The reason I tell you this is because, not so much for Franklin, but we have people that take school online, and they come and work at Crane full time as a student, and they're getting their degree at night. Because again, you're not just a summer intern. We hire you as a government employee with the intent that you'll get converted at the end of your graduation. Okay. That's the SSEP program. So if you're a STEM student of some kind, you can send your resume to those places I mentioned earlier. And, in the email to say, hey, I heard Mr. Thomas mention this, STEM internship program. Now, there are some things getting ready to change with Crane, we hope. Our bachelor or business internships were a little different. You had to go through USA Jobs to get on those, and they only open up one time a year, and that's in the fall. They've already opened up. We're selecting people right now, and unfortunately, unless you have the Schedule A thing I talked about earlier, or maybe you're a disabled vet, that's the only way. They're talking about giving us direct hire authority for our business internships too, and they will be virtually identical to that SSCP program that I just talked about earlier. So again, if you're interested, send your resume to us. At the end of the day, it's a good thing to have us take a look at it anyway. How about if you're getting ready to graduate? Well, same thing. Send your resume to us. We have contracting specialist jobs open. Those are jobs. Remember, I was talking about the gee whiz scientists that build everything, right? We have a ton of contractors, 3,900 employees, 1,500 contractors working for our agency. The reason that is because we have these geniuses who invent new things. Well, those geniuses who invent new things aren't expected to paint them gray, right? Or to screw them together. They invent the things. So we have a lot of contract work, right? those contracts and all the materials that go with it, 8,000 gallons of particular gray paint that's going to paint something naval gray, and it has to not be able to interfere with electronics and all this stuff. That has to be a contract. So that job as a contracting specialist is you go in and you shop vendors to meet very specific specifications for either labor or materials or whatever. You write the contracts, and then you take those to what's called a warrant holder, one of your managers, and they will then obligate $3 million to somebody to build something or to provide paint or to provide labor, whatever it might be. That's what a contracting specialist does. You need to have a bachelor's degree. They really like business degrees more than any other, but it doesn't matter. As long as you have a bachelor's degree, you got great writing skills, you might get looked at. So you can send that to us there. Accounting positions, we're really looking for some good accountants right now too. You have to have an accounting degree or a degree with at least 24 hours of accounting. Be really interested in seeing some folks for that. We have some logistics positions open, not very many, but we're always looking for logisticians. So if you're supply chain management, that type of thing, maybe you spent some time in the military and logistics, but now you're getting a business degree, would love to hear from you there. At the end of the day, we get a lot of resumes from a lot of people who are getting like medical degrees and things like that, and we don't have the positions. Now, I just said a minute ago, you could be a contracting specialist with any degree, but most RNs don't want to go do contracting work, right? They want to be an RN. So I just tell you that if you're business oriented, financial management, finance, we are looking for some finance folks right now. If you got any type of finance degree or finance background, I'd love to hear from you. Contracting specialists, accountants, computer engineers, computer scientists, electrical engineers, really honestly about any kind of engineer is one of the things we look for. And I mentioned some of those. Some of these degrees may not be at Franklin, but you may have friends out there in college that are getting these degrees. And I'd love for you to share this information with them too, because we're always looking for the greatest talent we can find. And I think that's about it. It looks like we may have one more chat down there. I saw the little red thing pop up on the chat. Is that another question? No?
Nope, no other questions as of right now, but we will make another call here. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it in the chat, and we'll get you an answer to it.
All right. I saw Kevin shaking his head a little bit as I was talking there. Anything strike either one of you guys about anything I've talked about, or anything pop up in your mind as I was talking that you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, well, I appreciate this, and very informative.
Mhm.
And I had always wondered about government jobs.
Mhm.
I'm actually working on my doctorate
Hmm.
at Franklin, and do work for 13th largest bank in the United States,
Oh,
Key Bank,
excellent.
and so I'm in finance, but my area there at the bank is risk management.
Oh, okay. Very good.
So I'm involved in making sure that as we implement computer systems and technologies, that they don't break down, that we observe where the risks are when we implement so we don't lose.
Right.
We have penetration, all sorts of issues like that.
Sure.
And then I have done a master's as well from Columbia University in international affairs. So,
Right.
but I'm just really thinking. I mean, I appreciate your information,
Yeah.
and you never know when you need to change careers
Right.
or follow something else, because I've been doing this for quite a long time.
Sure.
So
It's really interesting. You mentioned the risks and stuff. I've learned so much at Crane, and I'm not a scientist or engineer, but it just shocks me sometimes the things that we do. I'll give you an example. I had no idea this was going on, but people sell electronics on eBay all the time in bulk. Old trash computers, that type of thing. I found out that foreign nations will buy those by bulk, and they'll actually have laborers go out and desolder and unplug the chips and things from those, and literally like wash them off in a river, right? Scrub them down, and then they'll re-stencil those as new components and sell them back. And so we have a whole lab there that does nothing but check new components to make sure they are what they are, and that they haven't been manipulated to have some sort of malicious code built into that part before we go and put it in something one of our warfighters is going to use, right? It's amazing. We have with one of the only printed circuit labs in the entire country. We literally can make printed circuit boards from the ground up, and we do that partially because you can't trust a lot of people, to do it for you. Our nation's defense is vital, and there are some truly nefarious things that go on to try to, to break us down. So yeah, but yeah, I appreciate that.
You may have heard about solar winds
Hmm.
in the news. I mean, that's an example of where you have a trusted vendor and maybe using their software and not realize you've been breached.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. What you have is a local
Yeah.
case. That's good
Right.
that you hear that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. You got another, I see a 2 down there now, Tim. What do you have?
We did get it. We did get a question, the question is, does Crane hire remote employees?
Okay, well, that's a great question. Here's the thing: the government uh, tries to push telework, right? We love telework because at the end of the day, President Obama passed the Telework Act and said, "Hey, let's start doing this. Saves on emission. It keeps our employees more safe. That type of thing." Unfortunately, at Crane, a lot of what we do is secure, right? So at the end of the day, while we don't have really any 100% telework positions, we do have the option, and most employees do telework maybe 1 or 2 days of pay period, right? Now, COVID has opened a lot of eyes, and I can't tell you what the future holds, but I can tell you that the vast majority of our folks have been teleworking since March of last year. A lot of them way more than 1 or 2 days of pay period. In fact, I've only been on base twice. Now, I'm a recruiter. What I do is not really classified information, right? I'm just talking to people on Zoom and Microsoft Teams and all these things. But even some of those folks are able to do it. We have technology that allows us to even do some secure work now. So I guess what I'm telling you is that currently our policy at NSWC Crane would be that number one, we never let students work telework. Well, we have this year, and in fact, it gave us an advantage because we were able to hire several students that we wanted who had turned us down before, and then found out that their internships had fallen through. Right, so I guess I'll tell you that the future's bright. Uh, I can tell you currently, no, we don't have any 100% telework options that I'm aware of, but there are a lot of people teleworking. So hopefully that answers that question. And I can tell you again, the government does push telework. They most places do have options to do that. Maybe not 100% of the time, but certainly to allow you to stay home sometimes. All right. Looks we got a 3 down there. Is another question?
She's just saying that answered her question, and thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I tell you, you've got my name right up there. If you take my name and you put a dot between those two, so Theron.Thomas at Navy.mil, that's me. You can email me also. If there's something I haven't answered on here or something you want clarification for, if you just want to ask a question, send me your resume, whatever, you can certainly email me also. But again, that Crane_recruiting at Navy.mil is the best way because that's my email box also. I look at it every day. So either one of those, Theron.Thomas at Navy.mil or Crane_recruiting at Navy.mil will be your best connection to get with us. And I really, really hope to hear from some of your students and maybe get some great leads because I tell you, it's fantastic. If I tell people all the time, I'm glad I spent 30 years in the military, retired as a sergeant major, my life is good, right? If I had known the government is as great as it is, I might have only did 20 or 25 years because it's been a fantastic job and I really, truly enjoy it. So hopefully I'll see some of you guys get a hold of us.
We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the great information.
Uh-huh.
Cindy and I are constantly trying to have students convert that so what information into we call them their accomplishments. Tell us your accomplishments.
Right. Yeah, right.
Don't tell me your daily responsibilities. That bores the recruiters.
Right.
Tell me how you went above and beyond. So it's great to hear that others are really focused on that accomplishment based resume as opposed to just the general information. So
sure. Absolutely.
Nice to know we're doing the right things.
You certainly are. Yeah. And I really appreciate you guys doing this too. I tell you, there are some schools out there who don't have career service offices that are nearly as engaged. It's a sad thing, but they don't. You guys, well, after Sherelle introduced me, the communication we've had and stuff, the students that are seeing this, listen to it. You've got a great career service offices. They're doing the right thing. So if you need anything, let me know. Again, it's been a pleasure. I really, really enjoy doing these types of things. And if you need me again sometime, feel free to reach out and hopefully I'll hear from some folks.
All right.